Guys, welcome back to the channel. So as I mentioned before, I recently finished rewatching The Testament Season 1, and I've already made a few videos talking about some of the things that stood out to me. But after sitting with that finale for a while, I started thinking about something else. Season 2. Because now that Hulu has officially renewed the show, there are a lot of questions that still need answers. There are also several storylines that feel like they're only just getting started. So in this video, I want to walk you through some of the biggest predictions I have for The Testament Season 2. Some of these are based on things we've already seen in Season 1. Some come from clues the show has quietly planted throughout the story. And a few of them are directions that simply make the most sense based on where certain characters ended up by the finale. Of course, none of this is confirmed. These are just the predictions that I think have the best chance of happening when Season 2 finally arrives. And honestly, one character keeps coming back to my mind more than anybody else: Agnes. Because if there's one person whose entire life changed by the end of Season 1, it's her. Then you go straight into the first section. Agnes entered Season 1 believing she understood who she was. She believed she understood her family. She believed she understood her place inside Gilead. By the time the finale ends, almost all of that certainty is gone. The biggest reason, of course, is June. For years, Agnes grew up hearing stories about a dangerous woman, a criminal, a rebel, a terrorist in the eyes of Gilead. Now she knows that woman is actually her mother. And I don't think we've even begun to see the impact that's going to have on her. What makes this situation so interesting is that Agnes isn't just discovering a secret. She's discovering that the foundation of her entire life may have been built on lies. Think about what that does to a person. The people she trusted told her one version of the story. The truth tells her something completely different. And once that door opens, it's hard to imagine Agnes simply accepting everything Gilead tells her ever again. I think one of the biggest storylines in Season 2 will be Agnes trying to learn more about June. Not openly, but quietly, carefully. The same way somebody starts pulling on a loose thread without realizing how much of the sweater is about to unravel. Because the more Agnes learns about June, the more she may start questioning the entire system around her. And that leads directly into another prediction I've had ever since the finale. I think Agnes is heading toward becoming an aunt. Now, before anybody panics, I don't mean she's suddenly going to become a loyal supporter of Gilead. Actually, I think the opposite may be true. At the end of Season 1, Agnes sacrificed a future that Gilead considered valuable. Her marriage arrangement collapsed. Her social standing took a hit. And she's suddenly no longer following the path that was planned for her. In many ways, she's become exactly the kind of girl Gilead doesn't quite know what to do with. That's where Aunt Lydia enters the conversation. Because if there's one person who understands how dangerous Gilead can be for young women, it's Lydia. And I think Lydia sees something in Agnes. Not just intelligence, potential. Agnes is observant. She's thoughtful. She asks questions. And perhaps most importantly, she's beginning to see the cracks in the system. The aunt route would accomplish something very important. It would protect Agnes from becoming another commander's wife. That's huge, because right now, marriage is probably the biggest threat hanging over her future. The moment Agnes becomes somebody's wife, her freedom shrinks dramatically. Her opportunities shrink dramatically. Her ability to learn the truth shrinks dramatically. But becoming an aunt changes everything. Suddenly, she gains access. Access to information. Access to influence. Access to parts of Gilead that ordinary women never get to see. And if Aunt Lydia is secretly playing a much bigger game than everyone realizes, then having Agnes close to her would be incredibly useful. What's interesting is that this could completely transform Agnes's role in the story. Season 1 was largely about her waking up. Season 2 could be about her learning how the machine actually works. And those are two very different things. Learning that something is wrong is one step. Learning why it's wrong is another. I think that's where Agnes's journey is heading next. Not toward blind obedience, not toward becoming another obedient wife, but toward understanding Gilead from the inside out. And once she reaches that point, she could become one of the most dangerous people in the entire system. Because history has shown us something very important. The people who bring down a system are often the people who understand it best. Now, speaking of people who may become much more important in Season 2, we need to talk about Becca. Because when Season 1 started, Becca felt like one of the quieter characters in the story. She wasn't constantly drawing attention to herself. She wasn't involved in every major conflict. But by the time the finale arrived, her situation had completely changed. And honestly, I think there's a good chance that Season 2 turns Becca into one of the most important players in the Resistance storyline. The reason is simple. She has already crossed a line that most people inside Gilead never cross. She's acted. A lot of people inside Gilead have doubts. A lot of people have fears. A lot of people secretly hate the system, but very few actually do something about it. And once somebody takes that step, there's usually no way back. What makes her situation especially interesting is the marriage to Garth. On the surface, it looks like a solution, a convenient arrangement, a way to protect her, a way to make certain problems disappear. But I think there's a lot more happening beneath that marriage than we've seen so far. Because if Garth truly is connected to Mayday, then Becca may be standing closer to the Resistance than she realizes. And that changes everything. Imagine what that could mean moving forward. For the first time, Becca would have direct access to somebody actively involved in fighting Gilead. Not rumors, not stories, not whispers. An actual connection. And I don't think the show would set that up without planning to explore it further. What I find fascinating is that Becca and Garth could become something Gilead never expects. A couple that appears completely loyal from the outside, while secretly working against the system from within. That's the kind of thing that makes resistance movements dangerous. Not loud rebellion. Hidden rebellion. The kind nobody sees coming. Because let's be honest, the people running Gilead expect resistance to look a certain way. They expect protests. They expect violence. They expect people trying to escape. What they don't expect is a perfectly respectable married couple sitting quietly inside the system while gathering information. And if Becca eventually learns the truth about Garth, I think there's a strong possibility the two of them become far more involved in resistance activities than anyone anticipates. Especially because Becca now has something powerful motivating her. Agnes. One thing that stood out to me throughout Season 1 was how often these characters risked themselves for each other. Friendship became one of the strongest themes in the entire show, and I don't think that's going away. If anything, I think it's becoming more important, because the stronger these relationships become, the harder it becomes for Gilead to keep everyone isolated. And isolation is one of the regime's most effective weapons. Once people begin trusting each other, sharing information, and protecting each other, the system starts losing control. That's why I wouldn't be surprised if Becca and Garth slowly become part of a larger underground network during Season 2. Not overnight, not immediately, but step by step, the same way these stories usually unfold. Then, of course, there's Aunt Lydia, and honestly, every prediction video about Season 2 eventually leads back to her. Because whether people love her, hate her, trust her, or distrust her, she remains one of the most important people in the entire story. The thing about Lydia is that she always seems to know more than everyone else. Even when she's standing quietly in the background, even when she isn't saying much, you get the feeling that she's constantly calculating, constantly observing, constantly planning. And I think Season 2 is where we finally start seeing more of that plan. Throughout Season 1, Lydia often felt like somebody moving pieces across a chessboard, not revealing everything, not explaining everything, just making small moves that seem insignificant until you look at the bigger picture. The more I think about it, the more convinced I become that Lydia is playing a much longer game than most people realize. Because if her goal truly is to damage Gilead from within, she understands something important. You don't destroy a system like Gilead overnight. You weaken it. You expose it. You force it to reveal its own contradictions. And one of the most powerful weapons against a regime like Gilead isn't violence. It's information. Information is dangerous. Information creates doubt. Information creates questions. Information creates consequences. That's why I think Lydia's intelligence gathering efforts are going to become much more significant in Season 2. The information she has access to could be devastating. Think about what Lydia sees every day. She sees powerful people. She sees secrets. She sees hypocrisy. She sees things that ordinary citizens never see. If those secrets start reaching the wrong people, the consequences could be enormous, especially if those secrets begin reaching Canada. And that's where things get really interesting, because Gilead survives partly because of its image. The regime constantly presents itself as stable, orderly, moral, righteous. But what happens when evidence starts exposing what really happens behind closed doors? What happens when the stories Gilead tells the world stop matching reality? History has shown us that powerful governments often fear embarrassment almost as much as they fear rebellion, because once credibility starts cracking, everything else becomes harder to maintain. And if Lydia is actively collecting evidence against Gilead's elite, she may be holding one of the most dangerous weapons in the entire story. Not a gun, not an army. Information. Then we arrive at something that I know many fans are already talking about, the possibility of major reunions. Because let's be honest, ever since The Testaments was announced, there has been one reunion that viewers have wanted more than any other. June and Agnes, or June and Hannah, depending on which name you prefer using. The moment Agnes discovered the truth about her mother, the entire dynamic changed. Before that reveal, the idea of a reunion felt distant. Now it feels inevitable. Maybe not immediately, maybe not early in Season 2, but eventually, because from a storytelling perspective, everything seems to be moving in that direction. The emotional weight is simply too big to ignore. Think about everything that's happened. Think about everything June has sacrificed. Think about everything Agnes has lost. Think about how many years have passed. Those storylines have been moving toward each other for a very long time, and now they finally feel close enough to collide. The interesting question isn't whether a reunion happens. It's what happens afterward. Because reunions sound beautiful when people imagine them, reality is usually more complicated. Agnes has spent years growing up inside Gilead, years hearing certain stories, years learning certain beliefs, years becoming a different person than the daughter June remembers. And June isn't the same person either. Both of them have changed. Both of them carry scars. Both of them have experiences the other cannot fully understand. That's what makes the possibility so fascinating. A reunion wouldn't simply be emotional. It would be complicated, messy, painful, beautiful, all at the same time. And honestly, those are usually the most powerful moments in television. The moments where people finally get what they've wanted, only to discover that getting it is far more complicated than imagining it. Now here's the bigger thing I've been thinking about. When you put all of these predictions together, a pattern starts to emerge. Agnes is questioning her world. Daisy is operating inside enemy territory. Becca may be moving closer to Mayday. Shunammite's faith may be starting to crack. Lydia appears to be gathering information. The resistance seems to be growing. And possible reunions are moving closer. Individually, these storylines are interesting. Together, they point towards something much larger. Momentum. For most of Season 1, Gilead still felt powerful, dangerous, untouchable. But beneath the surface, something else was happening. Cracks were forming, tiny cracks, the kind that seem insignificant at first, until suddenly they're everywhere. And that's why my biggest prediction for Season 2 isn't actually tied to one specific character. It's tied to Gilead itself. I think Season 2 is going to focus heavily on the idea that the regime is becoming more vulnerable than it appears. Not weak, not defeated, but vulnerable. There's a difference, because powerful systems rarely collapse the moment they encounter resistance. They collapse when resistance starts appearing from multiple directions at once, from outside, from inside, from the people enforcing the rules, from the people living under the rules, from the people who once believed in the rules. And that's exactly what seems to be happening here. The resistance is no longer limited to one group. It's spreading. Different people are beginning to challenge Gilead for different reasons. Some want freedom, some want justice, some want answers, some simply want the truth. But all of those motivations can lead to the same destination. And that's what makes Season 2 feel so exciting. For the first time, it feels like several major storylines are moving toward the same point. Not separate paths, converging paths, the kind that eventually collide. And if that happens, I think Season 2 could end up being even bigger than Season 1. Because Season 1 was largely about discovery. Discovery of secrets, discovery of identities, discovery of hidden truths. Season 2 feels like it could be about consequences. The consequences of learning those truths. The consequences of questioning authority. The consequences of choosing sides. And once those consequences start arriving, everything changes. So if I had to sum up my biggest prediction for The Testament Season 2, it would be this. I don't think the story is simply preparing us for another chapter. I think it's preparing us for a turning point, a point where several characters stop reacting to Gilead and start actively shaping what happens next. And if that prediction ends up being correct, then Season 2 might be the season where the balance of power finally starts shifting. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough for everyone to notice. And once that shift begins, it becomes very difficult to stop.